Hey everybody, and welcome to the second writing module for the course, Advanced English Literature. And today in this second module, we're going to be talking about some really important things. Now, this module is actually not about your introduction or any of the paragraphs that you're writing. This module is about what you do before you start the exam. What I see a lot of the times is students who come, they sit down, they start the exam, and they immediately start writing a whole bunch of things down. So before they've even gathered their thoughts, they just kind of start writing stuff down on paper. And it's really confusing for the examiners to read this because we think, what is this student writing? What do they actually mean? And that's because they haven't really come up with a skeleton or a base or an outline for exactly what ideas they want to convey in their essay. So in this writing module, what we're going to do is we're going to be focusing on two main things. The first one is how to tackle the question. That is, you have to make sure that in all three of your body paragraphs, you have some really essential information about what exactly you're writing and to make sure that you've addressed all parts of the question. And the second part is how to kind of create this skeleton or this outline that you're going to use when writing your essay. So this is an important course, and as always, after this course is finished, you'll have some homework to do, and you'll have to do that in order to move on to writing module number 3, or writing lesson number 3. So let's get started. Okay, everybody, so let's just get started. We'll jump right in. So let's go through some of the steps that you have to do when you are learning to write this exam. So before you even start. As I said, it's extremely important that we kind of do a few things before we even start writing. And as I said in my introduction, it should take a few minutes at least that you have everything organized before you even start writing. So the proctor should see you first with your pen and paper before they see you actually typing on the computer. So in order to do this, you can look back at lesson 1 and you'll see there a tile that says sample essay from 2024. And this sample essay is the exact question that the students had in the resit exam that was in August of 2025. So first thing that we do when we're looking at this is we look at the questions that we have on the exam. So I always like to say, first, study the questions, and you'll see there that in these questions there are themes and there are symbols that are kind of applicable to several different texts, and you've read 6 for this course. So question A is analyze the role of memory and shaping identity in 2 works. So we can say here, memory. The second question, question B, is how do works address the tension between individual desire and societal expectations? And question number 3 is, of course, how do 2 literary works depict the struggle between conformity and individuality? So you can see here that these are some of the questions. And then you really have to think, okay, which one of these actually work with the text? In which of these texts is this something that's, that are themes or that are things that are really discussed? So I'm going to look at the text that I actually am going to teach for this course, and I'm going to look through and I'm going to see which ones would possibly play a role. So, for instance, in memory, if you look at the comic book V for Vendetta, that could be a role if we're talking about memory. But memory is not really something that's, and you could also possibly, if you wanted to do memory, you could also do 100 Years of Solitude. That could possibly be playing with memory, but it's really not, they're not really that strong. When we talk about individual desire versus societal expectations, here I'm thinking definitely The Catcher in the Rye. And, of course, Darius the Great is Not Okay. And essentially, those would also possibly work with this last question here, which is conformity versus individuality. And I think actually here that this second one, individual desire versus societal expectation, so this kind of like tension between the two, is actually something that I'm going to look at. And I think here that what I'm going to do is I'm really going to focus on this question right here. So number 2, and I'm going to look at these two texts because I know that The Catcher in the Rye and Darius the Great is Not Okay, they're actually kind of similar books. And why are they similar books? Well, they both deal with teenagers. So I can see here that they're both dealing with teenagers, that it's both dealing with coming of age. So they're both kind of like, The Catcher in the Rye is young adult lit, but it's from the 1940s, but it's still a book about Holden, and Holden essentially getting older, and Holden kind of being this, not necessarily a loser kid, but he doesn't live up to anything that his parents expect him to do. And essentially Darius and Darius the Great is Not Okay has the same thing. It's kind of like a retelling of the story almost, except for in this case, Darius is an Iranian American kid who has to go back to Iran and is facing a lot of issues there. So what I'm going to do now is I've thought about the questions, I've looked at it, I've seen, and I've chosen 2 really appropriate books. So now I'm going to figure out, okay, what am I actually going to write about here? And in order to do that, I'm going to start with kind of, my system is to use a mind map. So first thing that I do here is I make sure that all of the parts of the question are there. So if we look at the question, we can actually see here that the question is, how do 2 works address the tension between individual desire and societal expectations? So I'm going to look at this question and I can see immediately that there are some things that I really have to kind of like focus on here. Because if we look at what we need to focus on, we can see that we have to focus on the tension between individual desire and societal expectations. Which means that when I'm writing my first paragraph and I'm writing my thesis, that I'm going to make sure that I use the word tension, individual desire, and societal expectations, because that's what it's about. And in my body paragraphs, I have to also kind of think about, well, how do these works actually do that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mind map that. And the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to, I'll show you the system that I use, is individual desire, I put here. And here, I'm going to put societal expectations. I'll keep it on one screen. Okay, so when we look here, we could see that this is kind of the system that we have. I have the 2 main points that we want to go here. And of course, in each paragraph, I should show that there's going to be a tension. So I like to put a circle around both of these right here. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to think about in each book. So I'm going to do The Catcher in the Rye. And here I'm going to do Darius the Great is Not Okay. Yeah. So in The Catcher in the Rye, what are the individual desires that we have? Well, here we have Holden. And Holden is essentially a rich kid. He's a rich kid. And he kind of wants to be left alone. He's going through this really like kind of rebellious phase. He's at a boarding school. And he's not getting good grades. We'll say bad grades. And because he's getting bad grades, he essentially sees the world and adults as phonies. So he sees this, he comes up with this word phony, these fake people. He sees all of these adults as kind of like these super fake people. Now, in Darius the Great, we have a similar situation going on here. So Darius is, of course, he's a sci-fi geek. He's Iranian. He's picked on. And finally, he really just kind of wants to be his own. He's struggling with depression. And because he's struggling with depression, he constantly feels that he's a disappointment. And we'll come back to that more with kind of societal expectations. But he essentially wants to fit in. Whereas Holden kind of here wants to be rebellious and kind of be left alone. We see here that Darius, what does Darius want as a kid? He wants to fit in. He wants to find his part. So I'm going to move societal expectations over here. And here we're going to explore, in the worlds of these books, what does society expect from each of these characters? So if we look at The Catcher in the Rye, what does the society expect from Holden? He's supposed to be an upstanding young man. He's supposed to get good grades, go to college, go to uni, and eventually he's supposed to kind of move into this really like what we would call like upper class. He's supposed to, his world essentially by his parents, his family, has thought everything out. Yeah? Now, if we look at Darius the Great is not okay. If we look at in Darius, Darius is, of course, is living in this hybrid world. Which means that he has his American world and he has his Iranian world. And of course, the book, starting in the first part, is moving from the USA to Iran because we know that Darius's grandfather has brain cancer and is dying. So the family goes back to Iran. And in the US, we could see that he feels that he's a disappointment to his father. And his dad just wants him to be normal. And what is normal? Normal in this story is play sports. And there's even an instance there where that's even kind of discussed. So kind of play sports. His father also likes sci-fi, but his father wants him to kind of be more manly. Because we kind of get the hint that kind of Darius is this quiet, geeky kid. And we also have here that there's a racist issue to this too. That Darius is, of course, in comparison to all the other white kids in his school, Darius has a lot of hair, that he's got, he has kind of darker skin tone, etc., and that he's picked on because of that. So this leads to bullying. And in Iran, we see something very similar for Darius. So for instance, Darius is on antidepressants. And we could see here, well, Darius is on these antidepressants, and the Iranians do not understand that. Not okay in Iran. They're kind of like, well, what do you mean you're sad? You need to eat better. And his mother even tells him, hey, when you go to Iran, you don't necessarily have to tell everyone about your antidepressants because they're not going to understand that. Of course, we then learn that there's also a language issue. Darius cannot speak Farsi. And because of that, he really kind of misses the culture. He's kind of half in, half out. So he's living in this world where in the US, he's kind of like this outside person. He can't live up to the expectations of his American father. And at the same time, he can't live up to the expectations of his Iranian family. So he's kind of like the society. He feels like he's not American enough to be an American, and he's not Iranian enough to be Iranian. So what we have now is I now have everything kind of set up for my essay. And this is very important because in the next writing lesson, we're going to learn and we're going to focus on how do you actually start with this information. So what I have here is I now have essentially tons of really rich information to kind of discuss, because in my introduction, I'm going to say, hey, for the purpose of this essay, I'm going to explore how the novels The Catcher in the Rye and Darius the Great is Not Okay, how they explore the tension between the societal expectation of these two teenage boys and the individual desires, what these boys actually want to do, you know? And then, for instance, in paragraph 1, I can talk about, for instance, societal expectations. So what do these worlds expect from them? So I'm going to write this down here so I can even sit here and I can say, okay, well, let me kind of think this out. So in body paragraph 1, and here I'm going to say body paragraph 1, that's the symbol for a paragraph, kind of a double P backwards. I'm going to say societal expectations. And we're going to go in later in lesson 4 out of how to exactly organize this. But essentially I'm going to say is societal expectations. And I have a lot of facts here. I can say, for instance, and I go here to my notes, I can say in The Catcher in the Rye, in the world that Holden Calden lives in, that he is expected to be an upstanding young man. He's expected to get good grades. He has no agency over his life. And what I mean by agency is that it's really not up to Holden. Everyone's already thought about what that is. So Holden has no agency. And this, I'm just going to write down the big points. Holden has no agency. Everything has been thought out. And then, for instance, in body paragraph 1, when we go into Darius the Great is Not Okay, I'm going to say Darius the Great has a bicultural, he lives in a bicultural world. So what does that mean? It means that in the US, he has his father and friends and school. And what do they expect? They expect macho or more manly, what they consider to be normal, and not a kid who's obsessed with tea, you know? And so I have a lot of information here. I've already essentially written the paragraph. I can say, well, what are the societal expectations? And then in body paragraph number 2, here I'm going to go into, of course, individual desire. And then I would do the same thing there. So I go back and I look at my notes and I'm like, well, what are the individual desires that they have? Well, Darius kind of wants to be, or Holden, we'll start with Holden to kind of keep it in the same way. Holden wants freedom. He wants to be left alone, to make his own path, to be real, to not be a phony. Yeah? And then if we look at Darius the Great is Not Okay, what does Darius want? Well, Darius is kind of confused. He wants to be an individual also. So he wants to like his tea. There's even kind of this this friendship that's kind of blossoming with a friend in Iran that also kind of leads us maybe towards this idea of homosexuality. So we have then here that Darius kind of wants to be accepted for who he is. With his depression, because he has to take the pills, but also he wants to explore himself. What kind of person he wants to be. And he doesn't need this burden of his family, etc. So here you can see I've done in all of this work right here, if I were to take the exam of a student as a student, this would essentially be what I would write. Now, what your goal is in your homework for this class is going to be that you are going to now look at the 3 exam questions that you can find in writing lesson number 1. You're going to choose one of them out, and you're going to make also one of these notes, kind of where you mind map out how you would conquer one of those 3 questions based on any 2 books or any 2 films that you've read, either for this course or in the past. So once you've done that, you can hand that in, and once you've handed it in, you will have access to writing lesson number 3. Thank you very much.